All right, let's get started. Welcome, everybody. Happy for those who are jumping in now and who will continue to jump in. Welcome to Rico 12. I'm Justin B., your host and a child of an all-powerful and perfectly loving God and an addict living in the miracle of recovery one day at a time. I am a member of multiple fellowships and grateful to be, like I said, living in that miracle of recovery. Rico 12 is dedicated to exploring the common threads of addiction, sharing tools and offering hope from those who walk a similar path. We gather from diverse backgrounds, faiths, and locations to learn and support one another. Our speakers come from a variety of fellowships and experiences demonstrating the universal principles of recovery. And this is Rico 12 speaker meeting number 328. Thank you for joining us live or on the recording later. Today's speaker is Dave H., and he's discussing the gift of being single and sober, and we'll be talking about that topic and maybe some things that go around it. And I look forward to hearing his message shortly. But first, a few quick announcements. Rico 12 offers a variety of recovery resources, including other podcasts, social media communities. To explore more and learn more, visit rico12.com. That's RECO12.com, or check the chat and the show notes for links. Rico 12 is self-supporting, and your contributions help us continue this mission. Thank you to all our Spearhead donors, past and present, especially Lauren, Melissa, and Debbie this week. Your support truly makes a difference in helping us share this message with more and more people throughout the world. If you would like to contribute, please visit rico12.com/support. I'll put links in the show notes and in the chat for one-time or monthly donation options. Every bit of support, financial or through word of mouth, helps us share these messages of recovery. Each week, we receive light and inspiration from our speakers. Their experience brings hope, meaning, worth, and growth to us as listeners. Now I'm going to welcome today's guest speaker, Dave H., and I'll just read a little bit about him. And this is the bio that he sent me. He's got a sobriety date of August 1st, 1985 in SA. He came into program in Rochester, New York, separated from his first wife. He then moved to Detroit, Michigan in 1986 and started the first SA meeting, Sexaholics Anonymous meeting there in 1987. He divorced in 87 and moved to Nashville in 1988, where he got his first and only sponsor in 1989. They've been together for over 35 years now. That's a really cool thing. He had his first date while sober in 1990 and married his second wife in 1996, 2 days after his 11th sobriety birthday. They've been married for over 28 years now and have 2 sons. He served the Fellowship of SA in multiple capacities, including central office and finance chair, member of the team that moved central office to Nashville, and chair of international and local conferences. Take it away, Dave. The floor is yours.
Thanks. Am I unmuted there? There we go. Thanks, Justin. As he said, I'm Dave. I'm a recovering sexaholic, and by the grace of God and the fellowship of Sexaholics Anonymous, I've been sexually sober since August 1st, 1985, something for which I am frequently but never sufficiently grateful for. As the bio said, I understand there may be people that aren't familiar with Sexaholics Anonymous. So basically, the definition of sobriety for us is no sex outside of marriage and no sex with self. And so, and sex with self or masturbation, was an issue for most of us. My addiction started at age 8, and I came into the fellowship at age 33. And so I practiced my addiction for 25 years, had no clue that I was an addict. I discovered this. I was technically, I didn't learn this until years into recovery. But the neighbor kid next door exposed me to pornography when I was 8. He knew better. He was 4 years older than me. Today that would be considered sexual abuse. It was stimulating and exciting, and it took me away from what was happening inside the four walls of my home. My dad was diagnosed as being bipolar. He also had multiple addictions. I believe he was a sex addict. He was addicted to nicotine. He was an overeater. He was an alcoholic. My mother, I was to learn, years into recovery that she had been sexually abused by her father. And so while everything looked good on the outside of our home, it was not a safe place to be. I was never physically abused by my parents, but there was just a lot of emotional stuff going on. So it was much better for me to be outside the house than in. And so when I discovered pornography, this was in the early 60s. A lot of construction going on. I moved into a new neighborhood. They were building schools adjacent to our neighborhood. A lot of construction going on. Me and the other kids in the neighborhood had guys were leaving magazines around, and soon we had a stash, and we had a fort out in the woods, and we've had a something that we could protect our stash. And so, while the other kids, my mother worked second shift, so while other kids were at home having dinner, we had eaten already. I was up in the fort by myself looking at pornography, and I learned to masturbate when I was probably 9 years old, and that got me through all the way through my late 20s when I married for the first time, and so I grew up with an attitude that I had to have a relationship with a woman to be happy. I never thought of a woman as anything other than someone who I could have sex with. That was my mindset. And, I grew up in the 60s, went to college in 1970, married for the first time when I was 28. So, I had dated a lot. I was promiscuous in my dating relationships. Although I did have some standards, I never slept with more than one woman at a time, and it wasn't like I had hundreds of sex partners. But my standard was that I might be grooming somebody else, but I would only be being sexual with one woman at a time. And I met my first wife. In addition to being attractive and meeting all those criteria, she was smart. She had a good job. I had a great job. I was climbing the ladder in what was at the time a Fortune #1 company in the world, and was on the fast track. And she worked for a major corporation as well, and she was doing well. And we had the beautiful home, 2 cars in the garage. Traveled. We thought we had everything we needed. And it wasn't until a friend of mine who had one of those white light religious experiences, and he shared that with me, that I realized that even though I had everything I thought I needed to be happy, I really wasn't. And I started going back to church in the early 80s. And my spouse and I were of different faith traditions. And so I went back to the church of my upbringing, and I started feeling guilty about my behavior. I recognized that I was sexualizing other women, that I was flirting with other women, even though I was married. And I started trying to control it, and realized that I couldn't. So that was an interesting awareness to have. But I was getting something out of church, so I kept going to church. I tried to control my behavior and found that to be very difficult. And that included the masturbation. And because I hid that from her, I felt like that was my business and not hers. I tried to control that too, and realized that I had a difficult time doing that. And It wasn't until, and then I had another awareness that really never satisfied, no matter what I did to heighten the experience, that it always left me feeling kind of empty. And so I'd already had those awarenesses. And one day I was between jobs. I was taking a new job. I turned on the TV, which I thought was by chance. And there was a guy sitting behind a frosted glass, so you couldn't see who he was. And he was talking about having a stash of pornography. I had thrown all mine out when I got married because I thought I wouldn't need it any longer. So I wasn't doing that. But I was finding other ways to feed what I didn't know then was an addiction. And the subject that day was sexual addiction. This was 1984. There's a guy named Patrick Carnes that was promoting a book, which is now called Out of the Shadows, but is at the time was called Sexual Addiction. And I identified immediately, and it honestly, it scared the daylights out of me. But instinctively, I did not tell my spouse because I was afraid she might leave me. So the concept of dependency in relationships, I didn't know it then. That's what I would call it now. I thought I had to have a relationship to be happy. Another year and a half goes by. My wife comes to me and says she's not happy. We get some marriage counseling. I have no idea that this addiction affected my ability to be emotionally intimate with her. And so I never brought it up. And of course, the counseling goes nowhere. My wife moves out of the house. I'm unable to eat or sleep or concentrate at work. And I'm getting crisis counseling. And I knew if my boss was coming down on me at work because my work performance was suffering. And I went to my crisis counselor and said, if I don't take some time off work, I'm going to get fired. And I'm disabled. This breakup is devastating to me. Things got better. I was off work for about 5 or 6 weeks, and about 4 or 5 weeks into it, I went to my psychiatrist and I said, I don't think this has anything to do with the breakup of my marriage, but I am a sex addict. Can you help me? And he reached into his drawer and he wrote some stuff on a piece of paper and slid it across the desk. And on it said SA, P.O. Box 300, Simi Valley, California. And he said, contact these people. They might be able to help. And SA, of course, stood for Sexaholics Anonymous. It was located in Simi Valley, California at the time. Our founder was operating out of his garage. And I sent him a letter. I didn't know what SA stood for. I said, I have a sexual addiction. Can you help me? And they sent me a pamphlet that we have a pamphlet that has the problem, the solution, and 20 questions. And I answered 18 out of the 20 to the affirmative. And when I saw that the solution included a concept of a higher power or God, I broke down and cried. My wife had moved out of our yuppie dream house. It was on the market. I knew that was where I needed to be. Of course, it took me another 2.5 months to get to a meeting. There was only one meeting in Rochester, New York in 1985. And I went to my first meeting, and they talked about the concept of surrender to a power greater than ourselves. And that if we took action, either by praying a prayer or calling another member or going to a meeting and talking about our temptation, that it would be lifted from us. And it worked. I'm one of those rare people. I know of at least one other that I was sober for my very first meeting, and I was sober I've been sober every day since. By the grace of God, going on, 38 and a half years, 39 and a half years. It'll be God willing. I don't want to talk about that in August, one day at a time. So, I titled this talk, What a Gift to Be Single and Sober. So for my first 11 years in the program, I was sober before I remarried. And so I was celibate. And about 2 years into recovery in Detroit, the first meeting we started was at a place called CAPS, which stood for Children of Alcoholic Parents. And by our third meeting, we had over a dozen people coming to our fellowship because the therapist at CAPS were referring people to our meeting. And I'm starting to identify with these people talking about their crazy families. And by then, I was of a very conservative Christian faith, and I was trying to long distance carry on our marriage. We had a legal separation, and so we had divided the property, sold the house, all that kind of stuff, but we were still married. And I went back to pledge my love to my spouse in Rochester, New York, from Detroit, and she was already engaged to somebody else. And about 5 months after learning that, she's calling me for advice about how to break off that relationship. And I had this epiphany. Every one of my relationships up until that time had been exactly the same. Me being the dependent person, I always smothered people. But after a while, they get very tired of that. And eventually they push you away. Now, my relationship with my first wife was the longest relationship I'd had up until that point. And we were together for almost 4 years before she pushed me away. But now she was doing what I'd always experienced in all my previous relationships. She was coming back. And I always accepted them back. And we would reunite for some period of time. And then they would push me away for good. I saw that pattern. I was sober I was sober about 1.5 years when I had that awareness. If I don't get some help, I'm going to lose my sobriety. And so I sought out individual therapy with one of the counselors there. And that's when all the doors opened to me. I finally accepted the fact that I came from a very crazy family. And, not only was I an addict, but I was a codependent as well. And I was a codependent before I was an addict. I learned all these unhealthy ways of relating to people. And so I broke off contact with my ex. I had to do that. It was so toxic. She would go ahead and divorce me a couple of months later. And at that point in time, I was over 2 years sober. I knew I had no business of pursuing any kind of relationship. I had a lot of work to do to unpack all the stuff that had happened to me as a child. And so I did group therapy and individual therapy. And it was eye-opening. Ultimately, I ended up spending 3 years away from my parents. I had to break off all contact with my parents because I was my mother's intermediary with my father. My therapist called it emotional incest. That she was confiding in me, which put me in a position that my father would get angry and rageful because I would confront him on her behalf. Ultimately, he ended up threatening my life multiple times because of that. And and again, understanding my mother's trauma, her being sexually abused by her father. My dad was horribly abused by his parents. The fact that they were both able to hold down jobs. We had a nice house in a middle class neighborhood. It looked perfect from the outside. They were active in our churches and all that sort of stuff, but it was absolutely crazy. I moved to Nashville in 1988. I was 3 years sober. Still didn't have a sponsor. I was staying sober by working steps 1, 2, and 3. Took me a year to screw up my courage to ask my current sponsor to be my sponsor, and we worked the steps very quickly.
Got questions about addiction, recovery, or just life in general? Let's noodle it out together. Grab your big book, a pen, a highlighter, and a notepad, and join Nikki M. and me, Justin B., on Rico 12 Noodle It Out with Nikki M. Each episode, we take real-life questions, ours, yours, and those from the recovery community, and dig deep into the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous to find real, practical solutions. So, if you're ready to do the work and apply the solution, tune in to Noodle It Out with Nikki M., streaming now on your favorite podcast platform.
And we've been together ever since. And at about 4.5 years in, he said, have you thought about dating? And I said, well, I tend to be a little perfectionistic. And I said, well, I'm not sure if I'm ready. He goes, you're ready. Go out and do it. And I had heard this tape. I've tried to find it since. It was out there for quite a while. There's a drug and alcohol counselor by the name of Terry Gorski. He's passed away now, but he put out a tape in the mid to late 80s where he was at a codependency conference talking about how you have relationships in recovery. And he talks about relationships being in 3 stages: companionship, friendship, and love. And where companionship is, the event is more important than the person that you're doing it with. And so when I started dating, spending time with women, we did things like take walks, go to a free concert in the park or whatever, things that, I like to do. And it allowed me to be around women in a situation where I wasn't pursuing them for sex. Fortunately, there were a number of women in SA in Nashville at the time, and I learned how to be around them and not in a very healthy environment. We did a lot of group activities, men and women. Ultimately, we ended up doing book studies and things like that. I'm talking about relationships. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus. Keeping the love you find, that sort of thing. All of these 8 of these people ended up being in my wedding party when I got married. I dated for a number of years. I took 1 year off when my father was dying. 1993, my dad passed away, and I didn't have a date that year because I was focused on spending as much time as I could with him. But I learned a lot about myself, and ultimately, after dating for about 4 or 5 years, I realized that I could be happy the rest of my life. I'd been dating for 4 years by then. I could be happy the rest of my life if I stayed single. And I was doing a lot of service work in the program. I was active in my church. I had a job that I really enjoyed. I had great friendships, most of which were in recovery. And I said, I can do this. And I've been sex-free at that point in time for over 9 years. And I said, this is, I could do this. And About 9 months later, a friend of mine in a program called me to tell me that he and a single female friend had the idea of having a dinner party for singles. This was before Christmas in 1994, and that he wanted to know if I would like to come. And she was going to invite 4 women. He was going to invite 4 men. And we were just going to have a potluck dinner in December of 1994. I go to the dinner. The woman who turned out to be my wife, I really, got she was attractive. I really keyed into her personality. One of my friends flirted with her all night long and basically dominated the conversation. Barely got in a word edgewise with her, but I left the party thinking, I wouldn't mind seeing her again. And after calling him and asking him if he was going to follow up with her, and he said no, I called my friend back and I said, hey, can you get me her telephone number? His female friend called my wife and said, hey, this guy wants to call you. And which one was he? I don't think we talked that much, that kind of thing. Make a long story short, I started seeing her. I was seeing somebody else at the time, which was common for me in something that I'd never been able to do before in a healthy way. Ultimately, after seeing each other for a number of months, she asked me, why haven't you touched me? And I said, well, there's some things you need to know about me before I do that. And that's when I told her about my recovery. Going back to that tape, so companionship is the event is more important than the person. Friendship is when the person is more important to the event. So when you started to open up and share some emotional things about yourself, he also said that you should have a 10-date rule, that you did not talk about your recovery until at least 10 dates. I'm an engineer. I follow rules. I follow procedures. I followed that to the T. No contact between dates, all that kind of stuff. But I eventually, said, well, the reason I haven't touched you is because you need to know everything about me. And I gave her, I told her about my addiction in very high level details. I gave her a pamphlet. She's a speed reader. That took about 30 seconds. And she said, can you give me more? And I gave her the book, Out of the Shadows. I told her she could ask any question about my addiction that she wanted to ask. But I spared her the details. The only question she ever asked me is, did my addiction involve children? And I said no. And we got married a year and a half later. About a year later, we've got 2 kids. Our first child we had to have through in vitro. I have a picture of my first son with 8 cells before they implanted him into his mother. We adopted our second child, who was just dropped into our laps. We've been married it'll be 29 years in August. My life is unbelievable, but my addiction has never gone away. And that's why I keep coming back. I sponsor people. I talk when I'm asked. I serve when I'm asked, and I volunteer. And so, it was a gift for me to have all that time. Let's face it, we're all self-centered. Obviously, it took me a while to learn how to live by myself and be happy with myself. And it took years of therapy and group therapy. It's taken thousands of meetings and sponsored a lot of people. And I'm really grateful that I found what I found when I found it. And it takes what it takes. And so I'm really happy to be with all of you today. And and happy to discuss and answer any questions. So I'll shut up from there. Thanks.
Hey, Spearheads, if you're looking to dive deeper into the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous with people who live the solution, then you won't want to miss RICO 12 Big Book Roundtable. Join David G., Nikki M., and me, the moderator Justin B., 3 recovered addicts from multiple fellowships, as we break down the big book line by line. In each 30-minute episode, we share our experience, strength, and hope in a real, raw, and practical roundtable discussion. So, if you are ready to learn and apply what you learn, tune in to RICO 12 Big Book Roundtable on your favorite podcast platform. Awesome. Thank you so much, Dave. I really appreciate that, Sharon. The story, your willingness to walk through that and talk to us. I've written down several questions. A reminder to our live audience, if you have a question for Dave, please type it in the chat and I will get to that question. If you'd like to remain anonymous, in other words, if you wouldn't like me to read your first name with that question, just say anonymous or direct message it to me so it doesn't go to the general group, and I will take care of that. But Dave, what I'd like to do, and the reason why I initially reached out to you to speak is because I heard you speak on another medium. I read an article that you had written, is what it was.
Yeah.
And it was this concept of the relationship, dating, the friendship, the companionship, the friendship, and the love, and that process. Can you take us through that just a little bit more? What does that mean? The companionship dating where the event is more important than the person, and the friendship where the person is more important than the event. Talk us through a little bit about that.
Okay. Yeah. This was, like I said, I'm an engineer. So this was like, it was mind-boggling that relationships go through stages. And because I was always, I was seeking relationships out of dependency. I never, I had very few female friends growing up or, in adulthood. And I was always pursuing women for one primary reason. And thinking about, but I had a great model of companionship with my father. My father had a hunting buddy that he only saw during hunting season. And he did this for 30 years. And I never understood that. But they shared a common activity and they were friendly with each other. They enjoyed each other's company and that sort of thing, but they never saw each other outside of hunting season. So, I had a model for that, but I never thought about that, particularly in my relationships with women were always sexualized. So, because I'm a codependent, I thought, and I was raised in a certain era, I'm a baby boomer. So, I was raised that, if you go out with women, you pay. But to me, paying indicates a level of interest. And, me thinking as a codependent, I have this power over other people. I had to learn to be comfortable to do things that usually didn't cost money, but that I would share my time and learn how to be comfortable around women and not be trying to get something from them, a romance, any kind of physical contact. And, I had to work. And I did this, I met people, I had certain boundaries. I think in that article, I said, I didn't date people at work, from work, and I didn't go out with people from recovery. So how do you meet people? I was in my 40s, late 30s, early 40s when I'm doing this. And through my church, there were very few options because I was going to a very conservative Christian church at the time. Everybody was getting married in their 20s, so there weren't, and divorce was kind of a stigma. This was a group that really didn't condone divorce. So you were kind of marked. So that was kind of a stigma there. So anyway, through people in recovery, I was able to meet. They were involved with groups with their religious community, and they would invite me to group activities. And that's where I started first. And then if I met somebody that was interesting to me, I might ask them to do something. I bought season tickets to the symphony because I like music, and I bought 2 tickets. And I had money invested in that, but to me, the most important thing was me going to the symphony, and I could invite somebody along and just learn how to be around women and get to know people. There in my 6 years of dating, there was only one woman where I felt like we had become friends. We had shared some things about past relationships, and I started to talk, and we had been out more than 10 times. So I eased into it by talking about my codependency recovery. And that was where I first started opening up about, getting into more detail. We'd already talked about religious beliefs and that sort of thing. And so we were pretty compatible that way. And I started talking about my codependency. That relationship ended. I misread a sign. She invited me to do an activity with her parents, and I really interpreted that, and I had to cancel at the last minute. And that caused her to say, "Wait a minute." That was a serious breach for her, and she broke off our relationship at that point. And I understood it completely. I wasn't far enough along. I was checking most of the boxes with her, but the fact that I canceled out on meeting her parents, I didn't realize how important that was to any woman. You don't invite every bozo to meet your parents. And I canceled out, and she said, "Okay, I'm done." And I respect her for that. I've passed that on to my sons, by the way. But anyway, so my wife was the first person that, I went all the way with talking about, my addiction and why I had spent as much time with her as I had, and not even held her hand. Because I didn't feel comfortable. I wanted to be, rigorously honest about who I was and why I had those kinds of boundaries. Because, I think, unfortunately, if you look at our culture, my life was, I lived rom-coms, you see somebody from across the crowded room and yada, yada, yada. I needed to understand values and faith, beliefs, and for me, opening up meant being able to talk about all the things that I was afraid of, because my addiction is centers around fear. I was traumatized as a kid, and I need to feel safe with people, and so my wife was the first person I was able to do that with, and and it really helped with me with my codependency in terms of, having boundaries where, I became enmeshed with people. That was my MO. If I met somebody who was attractive to me and we usually connected physically very quickly, I spent every waking second with them. And, people get tired of that after a while. And so I had to have boundaries where, I would, at the end of a date, especially early on, I would say I'd had a wonderful time. And in my disease, I would line up the next date. And I had to learn to say, "Hey, I had a nice time. Thank you very much." And so.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing that. And that's, I think there's a lot of value in setting those boundaries, as you call them. Hey, companionship, friendship, love, and differentiating that and making sure that that's honored in that process. And it, like you said, for me, when I read that article, I was like, that's something brand new for me. And I'm actually teaching a class in my church to a bunch of young single adults about dating. And I've used a lot of these concepts that I learned
Wow.
from that in
Wow.
that. So it's been pretty cool to see these 18 to 35-year-old young people just go, wait, what?
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's go to this objectification topic. You know, you mentioned that for years you just saw a woman as an object to gratify sexual desire, you know, and there wasn't much else there. How did you have that process change from that to seeing them as a human and a person just like you? Hey, Rico 12 Spearheads. If our recovery resources have helped you, please consider a donation. Your financial support, as well as your word of mouth support, keeps Rico 12 running and reaching the man who is still sick. Donate today at rico12.com/support or check the show notes for PayPal and Venmo links. Every contribution helps carry the message. Thanks for being a Rico 12 Spearhead.
Yeah, obviously it took time, and I think, just digressing just for a second, touch does not come into the picture until you've achieved the friendship level of a relationship. So relationships have to go through all three stages, and touch does not come into play until we're emotionally connected to a person. So the touch coming early is just totally out of, and the Terry Gorski, who I found a later talk where he talks about people in recovery needing 3 to 5 years of sobriety before relationships can really be viable. And that's been my experience. As the dating guy in SA, I've counseled guys all around the world for a lot of years, and I've not seen anybody. The AA guideline used to be 1 year. You got to be sober a year before you'd have a date. I heard one of his later talks where he was a drug and alcohol counselor. He talked about 3 to 5 years, and that's been my experience too. I was almost 4 years sober when I started dating. I got married, a little after my 11th sobriety birthday. That's what I've seen happen. People that get sober to start dating, typically one or two things happen. Either they lose their sobriety and then lose their marriage, or the relationship doesn't work because they're still not healthy enough to be in relationship. So that's been my experience in the last 39 and a half years. As far as the objectification piece, women being in recovery with me really helped me with that. I was able to see that I've got an older sister, 5 years older than me, but she was out of the house. She was out of college before I was out of high school. She took the geographic tour. She moved from Ohio to California as soon as she could. We did not connect until I told her about my recovery in 1986. And we are fast. We are brother and sister today. She got into recovery immediately. She, like me, spent the same 3 years away from our parents. We did that together. So I didn't want to get up too, but that's how it works. So, I had no female relationships, and I got them through the fellowship. And yeah, did I have times when I fantasized about the women in the fellowship? Absolutely. That's the kind of stuff I told my sponsor. And that's what I do today. I'm mindful about my addiction. I have a disease, and if I see someone who is attractive, it may trigger a thought. And my challenge today is to observe, oh, there's my disease. what's my next right action? And so I'm trying not to judge it. I used to feel shame. When I notice somebody, an attractive woman or whatever, or a body part or whatever. And over time, I've been able to say, there's my addiction. God bless that person. And generally that's enough for it to dispel any desire for me to bring it back up. But occasionally it'll come back and I have to pick up the phone. I'll call my sponsor, I'll call somebody else in the program. And, I took a sec. I knew I married into the right family because my mother-in-law taught sex education in a Christian setting. My father-in-law is a retired pastor. So, I knew I was in the right family when, my mother-in-law's, I could tell my mother-in-law about my addiction. She started putting our pamphlets when she taught sex ed in a church setting. And we talked, when I took a sex education class that she gives to like sixth graders. And I learned that, men are triggered visually. So part of my triggering is kind of a natural thing for men. Women are attracted more emotionally than visually. But so not all of my noticing is disease, but I have to be careful with it because, I do have an addiction and I'm aware of that. So, just being around women in the fellowship, like I said, 4 of these women ended up being in my wedding party as usherettes. Had 4 male ushers and 4 female usherettes in my wedding party. So,
love that. Thank you for sharing that. All right, so Dave, another question for you. You talked about disclosing things to your date at that time after at least 10 dates, saying, hey, here's a little bit about me, and doing it high level and not just spewing everything at them. Yeah. What's the importance of being wise about a disclosure in a situation like that?
Yeah, the essay White Book, that we call our big book, talks about full disclosure can be harmful to those that we love, and now there are people who are called certified sex addiction therapists, CSATs, and I know in Nashville there are people who have discovered they're addicts, and they're in married relationships, and they're advocating for full disclosure, including polygraph test, to men or women who have been unfaithful in their marriages as a result of their disease. And what I've learned, from my sponsor is to give. There are times when the simple truth is appropriate, and sparing people the details, and so I know our pamphlet talks about dependency relationships. We bought it through the eyes. Or we got it through the eyes, we bought it, we sold it, we traded it, we gave it away. We were promiscuous, adultery, dependency relationships. Those were all, that pamphlet pretty much described me. And that's what I told Anne when I disclosed to her. And then if you read the Out of the Shadows book, it talks about it. I'm doing this from memory, and it's been a long time since I've read it, but talked about 3 levels of addiction, starting with, the pornography and masturbation being level 1. Level 3 is could be date rape or pedophilia, pretty, criminal offenses, basically. Our our disease runs a very wide gamut. And so, when I disclosed to her, I basically said what I just said to you. I said, that description of the problem pretty much describes me. And then after she read Out of the Shadows, she said, "What level are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm basically level 1." But she did ask me the question about children, and that's because she wanted to have a family. I have to tell you, it was only by spending by the time we got married, I was 42, she was 32. I wasn't sure. I was coming around to the idea of having a family. By the time we married, I was there because I had experienced her family and saw all the love there. And trust me, and it's not a perfect family. None are. My wife, before we got married, we went to an SA conference in Chicago, 1993, and she attended some S-Anon meetings. And she came out of those saying, I don't identify with these women. And I mean, they're really angry. Their husbands have cheated on them. And I don't identify with that. You've been open with me about your addiction. And so she's never, tried to manage my behavior as some married couples do. They notice their husbands turning their heads and all these kinds of things that sexaholics do. She's not had to do that. However, 15 years ago, she found herself working for an alcoholic. And she was coming home and describing his behavior. And I finally said, "Honey, I cannot be your sponsor. I think you need to go to Al-Anon." And she went to Al-Anon 15 years ago. And I can't tell you how that improved our marriage, because now we have a common language, and we're able to. And she calls me on my crap. She calls me on my crap, and so and sometimes sometimes it stings a little, but it's honest, and we have a wonderful relationship as a result of her 15 years in Al-Anon. So it works.
I love that. My wife and I had a similar situation just in the last about year, probably pretty close to the day of about a year, when I went to her and was talking about something. She said, "Justin, I am not your sponsor. I am not your higher power. Go to your sponsor, go to your higher power."
Yeah.
And as much as that stung when she said that, man, is it so healthy for that to come across like that. Yeah. And I love how you kind of did that with her. And now she, as she's also working her program, is able to say, "Hey," basically the same thing. "Hey, get out of here. Go talk to your sponsor. Go talk to your higher power."
Yeah. Have you talked to him recently? Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Good. So before we close up, Dave, do you have any final words of wisdom?
Well, I just, really appreciate the opportunity to share this stuff. I believe, that's how I work my 12-step. And, I tell people, I talked to a youth group about dating several years ago. And I said, I had to come to a place where I trusted God so much that I said, if I'm meant to be in a relationship, I'm not going to be able to screw this up. And that's the way it turned out. And obviously, I was a slow learner compared to what I thought I needed. But at age 72, going on 73, I've got a 25-year-old and a 26-year-old. I wouldn't change places with anybody in the world. So hang in there, one day at a time. That really helped me. I learned that very early on. I need to stay sober today, and everything else will take care of itself. So thanks.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Dave, for an amazing RICO 12 speaker meeting. If anybody here in the live audience had a question that they'd like to follow up on in this conversation, you can join our WhatsApp community. Dave, would you be okay if somebody had a question for you that I connect them to you through email or anything like that? Are you okay with that?
Yeah, that's fine. That's
Excellent.
absolutely fine.
So if anybody would like to get in contact with Dave, send me an email at rico12pod@gmail.com. That's RECO12POD@gmail.com, and I can get you connected with Dave. If you haven't already done so, please consider going and rating and reviewing RICO 12, the podcast, on Apple Podcasts and or Spotify. It's a powerful way to work Step 12 and get this out to more people who would benefit from messages like this that Dave shared with us today. Next Friday, we're going to hear from a speaker, Michael S., who has spoken here a few times before, and his chosen and self-admittedly controversial topic will be the 12-step program needs an update in 2025. Look forward to hearing his take on that this next week. Stay updated via WhatsApp or our email list. If you're not already subscribed, send me an email, and I'll get you on that email list. So, Dave, are you okay taking us out of here with the third step prayer?
I certainly am. Thank you.
Awesome.
God, I offer myself to thee to build with me and do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I might better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help, of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much, Dave. Remember, everybody, there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find God now. Keep coming back. And when you do, come all the way in, sit all the way down. Let's trudge this road of happy destiny together. Work it. You are worth it.
Standing still a moment, carving out this time, reflecting on the landscape of this life of mine. Peaks too high to conquer, streams too wide to cross, troughs too deep to walk through without incurring loss. Yet here I am, still standing tall, despite the rough terrain. One like me survived the storms and walked through wind and rain. Still standing, I will fight the good fight, still searching for glimmers of light, feet still on the ground. I can still be found, standing still.
My wings are torn and tattered, but I know I still can fly. I may not soar unfettered, I may not rise too high.
Recorded in the book of life and bind it with the seal.